Chapter 14. Dead Man Walking. Black. Nothing. Empty. I stared out of the plane's window at the fading twilight. Where stars and a moon should be appearing, I saw nothing. I was nothing. Bella was gone, taking everything with her when she leapt to her death. Her voice, her image, her scent. Everything she'd given me was taken with her into the void. She didn't even leave me any pain. Selfless to the end, she refused me punishment for my sins. Nothing. There was no why. No how could she. I could never have predicted she would commit suicide. But when had I ever been able to anticipate her responses? Only one truth remained. No matter what her reasons were for jumping, I had to be at fault. Even the what-ifs were meaningless. She's dead, Edward. That's all that mattered. And yet I felt nothing. I wanted to hurt, to burn, to suffer, but that would only give me a reason to continue my worthless existence. I was more than willing to spend an eternity in pain after leaving her to such a dreadful fate, but where was the justice in that? No, I'd earned this emptiness, but couldn't endure it. If only I could take my own life, as Bella had. As the blackness wrapped its cold fingers around me, a fiery poker touched the back of my hand. I remained motionless as the human's thoughts leaked into my consciousness. Cold! God, is he even alive? The young woman next to me removed her finger and lifted it to the flight attendant call button. Did you need something? I said, not bothering to look at the woman. She jumped, knocking out her earbuds. Dude, he's awake! You didn't seem to be breathing, she said in a Texas accent, her hand on her chest. I was worried you might be sick. I took a breath so I could reply. I'm fine. You don't look fine. You look dead. Oh, okay. She went back to her book, and I went back to nothing. Why I continued to look through her eyes, I'll never know, but what I saw actually made my head turn. She was reading about Volterra, trying to make a decision. She glanced at me, then back down to the page. Have you ever been to Italy before? No. I'd only seen the country through Carlyle's memories. Her disappointment came out as a sigh. Bummer. I was hoping to get some help deciding which excursion to take. Volterra sounds like one of those medieval castles. Maybe I'll do that. Sorry. My gaze didn't waver from her book, though, and she interpreted my stare as interest. See, I won this trip on the internet. She held up a brochure with the stone clock tower on the cover. My travel agent suggested this tour to a town called Volterra, but since he also routed me through Rio, I'm not sure I should take his advice. Her hand came up to cover a yawn. I was thinking of going to Florence instead. May I? I held out my hand for the flyer. As expected, a small map on the back pinpointed the tiny town, describing its proximity to both Florence and Rome. It wouldn't take me long to cover the 200 miles on foot. She pointed at the paper. It looks like a quaint village, but Florence is only a little further from Rome. Another brochure appeared in her hands. And David is there, she thought. Her cheeks pinked as she compared the naked statue's face to mine. I'm Marcy, by the way. I set the brochure back on her stack of papers, the name of the tour company catching my eye. Venoso Travels. Surely the Volturi weren't that obvious. Lying next to the pamphlets on her tray table was a card with a photo on the cover. Two young boys smiled broadly above the scrawled caption. Miss you, Mommy. I'd go to Florence if it was my choice. At this point, I had no choices. A friend of mine said there's this great restaurant in Volterra. It's apparently inside the prison of all places. It's run by the inmates on some kind of rehabilitation program. She heard the food was great, though. I wonder if the customers get to use knives or not. I wouldn't know. My interest in the woman's papers waned, and I grabbed the headphones out of the pocket in front of me. Pretending to plug them into the plane's audio system, I turned back to the black window. Well, thanks. You might want to try Channel 14. Hanson's Dream Girl is on the playlist. Her thoughts wandered to a young, blonde singer. The lustful fantasy faded, with a pang of guilt as she played with her wedding ring. A different dirge played through my mind. He's at the funeral. The empty words were all I had left. Spoken by an unknown man a half a world away. They should cause some reaction, some agony. I bit my lip, trying to force the emotions to come. Would you like something to drink, sir? A different voice said. No, nothing, I said, releasing my lip. The cut I'd made, but not felt, sealed itself immediately. Not having the pain to punish me was a hell. Not having the pain to punish me was a hell worse than any eternal fire. The woman next to me turned her attention to the flight attendant, finding someone more amenable to her musical tastes. I turned back to the blackness of the plane's window and pulled the blanket up over my shoulders. It provided no warmth, of course, only privacy, as I hid my face and pretended to sleep. My eyes remained open, mirroring the night as I prepared myself. The facts were simple. I lived. She didn't. For months, the only thing I saw when my eyes closed was Bella's face. Now she was gone. All that was left was black emptiness. I didn't even bother to breathe, losing interest in the masquerade I'd been living for a century. The constant buzz of thoughts floated far away, hardly noticeable in the void that my mind had become. My only function left on earth was to occupy space. This remaining time of my existence would be spent on one task, orchestrating my demise. Unlike Bella, I had to rely on others to do what I couldn't. It shouldn't be hard. The Volturi were decisive and swift when it came to punishing those they deemed lawbreakers, and there was only one law to break: keep the secret. The options were endless. As the plane started its descent, I considered how many ways I could accomplish my goals. I should have bought a comic book. Then I'd have detailed instructions. There's always the classics. Faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. All things I could do with ease. I just had to ensure a living, breathing, pulsing audience. But I had to guarantee the only end result would be my termination. No one else could suffer from the mistakes I made. Enough had suffered already. While the simplest tack would be to blatantly commit an atrocity, I had to ensure that my actions would not have any unintended consequences. The witnesses to my final sin would be safe. The Volturi couldn't risk a mass extermination in their own front yard. My feats would be explained away as the ravings of a drug-amplified madman, and I would disappear in a puff of violet smoke. But the talents of the Volturi were legendary, much greater than mine, so I had to assume that they would learn of my familial connections. Only I was to be punished, no one else, and I had to protect my family. I owed them that much. Then there was Alice. She had to know where I was and what I was planning. I winced at the knowledge that she would witness my demise in crystal clear detail, in fact, probably already had. But some things could not be avoided. I wished she would stay away, but I knew my closest sister as well as she knew herself. She was following me, of that I had no doubt. I wouldn't have much time. I gritted my teeth. I should have called her, convinced her to stay away, but it was too late. My phone was gone, along with the rest of my things. All I had left filled my pockets: a passport, a little cash, a credit card. But what did it matter? Alice wouldn't listen to me. She would defy her own vision to try and help, just like she'd tried to help Bella. But how could I protect my family, yet meet my end? I would have to approach the Volturi first. I pinched my eyes shut, forcing Carlyle's memories of the brothers out of the blackness of my thoughts. Aro, Marcus, and Caius were ancient, thousands of years old. Carlyle had spent much of his time in Italy, in Aro's company. Aro's ability was also to read minds, but through direct physical contact with the one he wished to read. It was a foregone conclusion that I would have to reveal my thoughts to him, displaying openly the love I had, for Bella and for my family. Surely, being on the receiving end of the invasion I committed constantly should stir a reaction. Fear, worry, anticipation, something. Nothing. My thoughts blanked as I listened for Bella's whisper, searching for one last memory of her pink cheeks. All I saw was black, the black of Aro's hair. The questions would come after I opened myself to him. The Inquisition a requirement to obtaining my goal. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself for what would be a difficult conversation. Would my connection to Carlyle help or hinder me? Aro seemed to respect Carlyle, but found his sense of morality and his chosen lifestyle lacking. If I hid my knowledge of my family, if it were even possible, but was then found out, the results could be catastrophic. My deception would entice them to hunt my family, and the result being, I shivered to even think about what would happen. If I could just convince Aro that I was alone now, and that my family had nothing to do with my desire for my end, they would be safe. That way, if my request is denied, I could force their hand without any unintended repercussions. Alice, especially, would suffer so much more than she deserved by my decision. I had to protect her and the others. I barely noticed when my nothingness moved from the inside of a plane to the faceless bustle of Rome. Mindlessly, I ran, caring little for the curious looks that strayed in my direction. No one who saw me would recognize me, not that it would matter if they did. Urban congestion became rural sprawl as I flew to the northwest. Any other time, running at this clip would have exhilarated me. Now it, like everything else, was meaningless. I slowed only when the Volterra city gate rose above me, devoid of any emotion, a zombie. Soon there would be peace. There had to be. The sleeping town was adorned with flags and banners, dressed for a party. I forced myself to read the Italian printing, unable to appreciate the irony. Tomorrow would be St. Marcus Day, the celebration of the eradication of vampires from the city. Plenty of witnesses, should the need arise, I thought. Though my demise was ensured, I felt no comfort. The castle rose above the other buildings, a dark, foreboding stronghold looming in the night. The clock in the square told 1 a.m. as the nondescript entrance to the Volturi's home came into view. Behind the benign glass doors, I heard a plethora of vampire minds, but it was the one outside the building that caught my attention. Chi è questo? A nearby mind thought. A gray-cloaked figure drifted down from the towering castle wall and approached me.
Buongiorno, il mio amico,
he said cordially. I understood his greeting and his matching Italian thoughts, translating both easily.
Clean cut, a bit wrinkled, American,
he assumed, as he gazed at me from under his large hood. He noted my eyes.
This one is thirsty, looking for a free meal, no doubt.
His reaction caught me off guard. I was thirsty, but that desire, like everything else, had vanished with those fateful words. When was the last time I hunted? It was of no consequence now. Signore, I answered, without breaking stride. I didn't have much time before Alice would catch up with me. The vampire blocked my path, and another cloaked figure appeared behind me.
You seem to know where you are going. What is your business in Volterra?
He said in English. His voice became more authoritative as he spoke, with only a hint of an Italian accent remaining. He evaluated me in a new way, listening with a different part of his mind. In other circumstances, I would have taken more interest, tried to decipher what was presumably his talent, but any curiosity was lost to the void. I wish to speak to Aro, I said, as I stared directly into his dark crimson eyes. I'm not the only one who's thirsty. The vampire behind me snorted.
Confident, aren't we?
he thought. The one in front voiced his thoughts.
That's quite presumptuous of you. What is your name?
I don't have time for this. Edward Cullen. And you are? I said firmly, waiting to see his reaction. Few vampires bothered with surnames. The concept of family didn't exist to them. This was the first test of Carlyle's influence. The vampire's nostrils flared in contempt. Maybe provoking the guard would be my only option.
Should I know you, Edward Cullen?
The last word rolled off his tongue like a curse, but stirred a memory for him. A rumor he'd heard. His eyes grew wide, and he glanced quickly to the vampire behind me.
Cullen. Not the animal lovers. Could the stories be true?
The same thoughts filled both men's minds. The cloaked figure blocking my path reconsidered his rudeness.
I am Dmitri,
he said, pausing as he considered me again.
Perhaps Aro would like to see a Cullen. Follow me.
We passed a single guard inside the door, a human male clad in a red jacket, and took an elevator to the second floor in silence. The lift opened to an elegant reception area, and I saw another human, a female this time, behind the opulent desk. She, too, evaluated me as we approached, but unlike the man below, she knew exactly what I was. The Volturi had quite a facade cultivated here, employing humans as part of their cover, but I dismissed it. Only one thing was important to me. "Good evening, Dmitri," she said pleasantly. She looked at me again, and I could hear the desire in her thoughts to become what I was, beautiful and immortal. A glimmer of memory sparked in my mind. Were these the same thoughts that Bella had? Her name echoed in my empty brain, bringing none of the joy or longing I'd known for the past 14 months. "She's dead, Edward." "He's at the funeral."
Hello, Gianna.
Dmitri and his companion both lowered their hoods as he spoke, slowing only for a moment.
Wait here, Edward,
Dmitri commanded, then shot a look at his comrade, who motioned me to one of the opulent couches in the room. I obediently sat on the one he indicated and stared blankly at the flowers on the table in front of me. The colors blurred as I ignored my eyesight and focused on the buzz of thoughts in the room beyond. I easily found the men who would hold my fate in their hands. Aro and Caius were engaged in conversation over a rash of suspicious killings in Mexico. Only one of those in attendance was participating in the conversation, a woman dressed in a charcoal gray cloak. The Volturi brothers were adorned in long midnight black robes, 2 shades darker than Dimitri's dark gray cloak. Others wore conventional clothing. The crowd surrounding the two was made up of personal protectors, trackers, and members of the elite guard. None spoke unless first addressed by one of the brothers. I recognized one of the elite from Carlyle's memory, a girl named Jane. Carlyle only knew her by reputation. She apparently had the ability to cause physical pain in others, to torture them. Because of her talent, she was the most feared of the elite guard, even though she was only a child when she was changed. Next to her stood her twin brother, Alec, whose ability to disable the senses of another was equally as powerful as Jane's, though less painful. I should fear the twins. One or both of them would probably be loosed on me, but self-preservation had been the first thing to fall into the abyss of nothingness. I focused briefly on Caius. He was intently analyzing Aro's every word, continually measuring the information he received against any threat of vampire exposure. His gift was not apparent to me, though I found it unlikely that he was without some extraordinary talent. Caius envisioned a strategy for quelling any threats in Mexico, remembering past disturbances in the region. Behind Aro and Caius, a group kept quiet guard around Marcus. Marcus was not part of the conversation. Rather, he sat quietly in a richly upholstered chair at the end of the room. I was surprised by what I heard in his mind, because it was all but blank. He looked upon the room, ignoring what his eyes showed him. The sight was enigmatic. Glowing trails interlocked the vampires, some thin wisps, other bright beams varying from blue to red. The web centered on Aro and Caius, who were connected by a nearly tangible white spotlight. Marcus's blue bond thinly held him to his brothers. Carlyle had known that Marcus possessed a gift, though it had never been revealed. I assumed the lights Marcus saw represented some kind of connection or link between the vampires, but didn't care to investigate it further. Only the unique red light connecting Jane to Alec made me pause. The wisps connecting the younger vampires to the ancients were also white, with hints of orange where it touched the twins. As I focused on Marcus, the blankness in his mind was suddenly replaced by a deep sorrow, and I caught my breath at the shift. Marcus's blue connection suddenly brightened. He suffered intensely, but the cause eluded me. The sensation was familiar, but distant. I envied him his grief. I wished for such punishment, but received none. The void took my last chance at penance. I prayed that it would swallow the rest of me as well. Dmitri entered the brothers' room. Red curtains, trimmed in gold, covered all the walls. An elaborate parquet floor hid the stone beneath. I could see through his eyes that the high ceiling was supported by a complicated web of carved beams, giving the chamber an air of throne room or cathedral. Dmitri approached the three Volturi reverently, waiting to be recognized. He didn't have to wait long, as Caius immediately noticed his entry. "Dmitri, what brings you in from patrol?" Caius wondered. A hint of concern laced his quiet thoughts. My focus shifted to the dark-haired ancient next to Caius. "Yes?" Aro asked, regarding the new arrival. All conversation in the room stopped. Dmitri bowed his head solemnly.
"Masters, a new vampire has arrived and requests an audience with Aro. His name is Edward Cullen."
The brothers exchanged a glance, and though memories of Carlyle appeared in Aro's mind, it was my first name that piqued his interest. Listening to his thoughts required more attention on my part, having to translate the mixture of languages floating through his mind, including ancient Latin. "Edward Cullen. Interesting," Aro said, stepping toward Dmitri with his hand raised. He wanted to read his minion's thoughts, to see my image for himself. Dmitri took a single step and also raised his hand. As they touched, I heard Aro's mind fill with sights and sounds well beyond what I sensed in Dmitri's head. I gasped as I realized that he was receiving all of Dmitri's thoughts, all his memories, all his ideas, even all his fantasies, from the beginning of his life. Aro was powerful, more so than even Carlyle had realized. Reflexively, I leaned over my knees and pinched the bridge of my nose. I would have to bear it all to Aro. As I pondered the consequences of sharing everything in my mind with him, he finished reading Dmitri. Aro looked up, and they each took a step back. Excitement colored Aro's voice. "Yes, interesting. Finally, something new. Please, show our young friend in." I stood as Dmitri came to collect me. I had no choice but to follow. Only one path lay before me now. He led me through 2 ornate wooden doors into a long hallway. I could see in his mind that he could sense exactly where Aro was, and that Caius was near him. Briefly I wondered if this was what he'd been doing to me before, marking me somehow with his mind. But it mattered not. Ahead of us were 2 doors covered in gold. The end was near. Dmitri was curious to see what had brought me here. He assumed that I wanted to join this powerful coven. I frowned at the thought. He couldn't be more wrong. We passed a panel, hiding another door, and he fondly remembered how he and his comrades slaughtered their prey in the room hidden behind it. I snorted, and he glanced back over his shoulder at me, surprised at my reaction. He opened one gilded door, ushered me in, and then stepped around me, leaving his comrade outside the room. As Dmitri moved forward, he glanced back slightly, inviting me to follow behind. Some of the vampires in the room showed interest as we passed. Others purposely ignored me, including Caius. Marcus regarded me briefly with disinterest. None of the glowing threads of light that he saw touched me. He only saw a faint crimson glow around me. Aro's gaze fell on me as I entered, and only intensified as we approached. When we stopped before him, everyone turned their attention to their black-haired master. "Good morning, Edward," Aro said smoothly. The curiosity in his thoughts was so strong, I was sure that everyone in the room knew exactly what he was thinking. I leaned my head forward in response. Aro's questions filled my mind, and I waited for the inquisition to begin. "You know Carlyle, I take it. How is my old friend?" Aro asked. He peered into my ebony eyes, disappointed that he couldn't discern my diet. "Carlyle is well, I believe." "Believe? You are his creation, then," Aro surmised, and I dropped my head again in affirmation. "Tell me, Edward, does he still refrain from human blood?" "Surely not," he thought. "Yes, Carlyle has never fed from a human. I strive to follow his example. At least I used to." A low murmur made its way through the assembly. Aro hid his shock well. 3.5 centuries. I underestimated him. "Interesting. So what brings you to our humble home today, Edward?" "I have a request." I paused. The mention of Carlyle's beliefs suddenly made the words extremely difficult to voice. I knew how much he would disapprove of my decision to exit this world. Aro studied my expression briefly. "Do not distress words, Edward. There is a much simpler way. Please, come closer." He raised his hand, requesting to hear my thoughts. The intensity of his curiosity was palpable. "Carlyle no doubt told you of my gift." "Yes." I considered for a moment. Aro would see it all, my family, my love, my pain. Would he see Bella, pull her image out of the abyss? A flicker of something, not hope, but maybe anticipation, licked the edges of my consciousness as I stepped forward. Perhaps this was for the best. He couldn't help but understand if he did see it all. And though it may seem that I had the option, Aro's thoughts made it clear that he would not continue any discussion with me if I refused him. It would bring the end sooner, I thought. My hand rose to meet his, following Dimitri's example. His touch was so light that it barely registered on my skin. Aro bowed his head over our hands, concentrating intently as my past repeated itself before his eyes. In his mind, I reviewed my life, the first 100 years flying by at high speed. My blurry human life passed in a blink, only to be replaced by my immortal family's faces as they flashed repeatedly in the echo of my thoughts. Then she appeared. I hadn't seen Bella's face in my mind since the fateful phone call, and I savored her image. That first touch in biology, her innocence in the meadow, the sound of her screams in the ballet studio, her sorrow in the forest. Each memory flashed by as fast as the others, but it was like I was seeing them for the first time. The pain filled me as the pictures of her rolled through Aro's mind, but it vanished again at the sound of the man's words, just hours ago. "He's at the funeral." Everything returned to black. It was over. Aro dropped his hand and stared at me as he sorted through the myriad of thoughts. The curiosity in his eyes was replaced with amazement. He'd discovered my talent and was impressed. But there was more. His thoughts swirled, trying to hide his other discovery from me. "Well, you are quite a find, aren't you, Edward?" He paused and gazed intently into my eyes. "You can truly read minds from a distance?" He thought. "Only what you are thinking at the moment," I answered indifferently. Caius eyed me suspiciously. "What is this?" he growled, as Aro chuckled. "Edward has an exceptional gift, dear brother. He can hear thoughts, but without the necessity of contact. What a wonderful talent!" Aro's voice grew more serious. "You may think yourself limited, but on the contrary, your gift is quite powerful." "Why have you come to us today, Edward?" Caius was more wary now. Aro looked expectantly at me.
though he already knew why I was here. He was forcing me to say the words. I turned to Caius. I'm here to end my existence. Caius's expression changed to surprise. You wish to die? Yes. Several of the guard immediately imagined dispatching me in their minds, more than happy to oblige me. Maybe this wouldn't be so difficult after all. Caius was still cautious, though confused. The only vampires he'd seen ask for death were those who'd been hunted down for one offense or another. Jane had tortured these wrongdoers as they were dismembered, and many had begged for death in the end. A quiet request for death had never been heard. Why? Does it matter? I asked, my somber voice echoing through the chamber. The words were familiar, but I couldn't place them. Caius didn't care for my apathetic attitude and prepared a scathing retort, but Aro cleared his throat, interrupting him. His thoughts had moved to a different subject.
You've experienced la tua cantante and resisted? He said. Everyone's eyes turned to me, fascinated, as their master shook his head and continued. No, not just resisted. You embraced her, loved her, tasted her. His voice filled with awe, but his words stung. The Italian description he used for Bella, my singer, was so appropriate given how her blood, her touch, her soul, had called to me like the most beautiful music. Soon the crowd started whispering, incredulous. Aro's thoughts followed suit. His were the only ones that mattered to me. Yes, I answered. The murmuring grew louder, and Aro raised his hand. The room immediately became silent. What a waste, he thought. And even though you left Bella to her fate, you still wish to end your existence, now that she may be gone. She is gone, I said, looking more intently into his murky eyes. And this is why you wish to die? Caius added. Fine, let him die. We have more pressing issues to attend to. Yes. But what of Alice's visions? She's seen you with Bella in the future, has she not? How can that be if the girl is dead? The strange thoughts crept into Aro's mind again, and he tried to hide them as he had before. It was more than curiosity. Want? Greed? Caius interrupted my concentration. Who is this Alice, Aro? He asked impatiently, mirroring the confusion of the crowd. Aro's eyes didn't leave mine as he answered. Alice is another talented member of Carlyle's family. She has the ability to see into the future and foresaw Bella's death. She has also had many other visions of Bella that show her very much alive, even becoming one of us, which Edward has seen in her mind. As he spoke, the images of Bella in her graduation robes hugging me, Bella leaning in to kiss me in a white wedding gown, Bella with ruby eyes and pale skin, arm in arm with Alice. These visions were repeated in Aro's mind, making his point. I winced, knowing that they would never be. More air made a useless trip through my lungs. Alice's visions are based on choices. The future she sees changes with each decision. At the moment, my future would be a cloudy haze in her mind, until Aro made up his mind. Aro's thoughts became more curious about Alice. Caius was becoming alarmingly interested in Carlyle, about how big his coven had grown. No, not them. This isn't about them. I frowned. This was exactly what I'd wanted to avoid. Aro's thoughts refocused on me. But you never saw the vision of Bella jumping off the cliff, he said. No. Thankfully. I pitied Alice, having to endure so many tragic events. And yet you are convinced that Bella is dead? Yes. The voice on the phone had confirmed it. Charlie was attending her funeral. What more proof did I need? So you've lost your mate, and have no desire to continue living, Caius summarized. Yes. A familiar story, Caius thought, and he glanced back to Marcus. I realized it was the death of Marcus's mate that put him in his stupor, and he'd remained there ever since. I glanced at the dark figure in the chair, understanding him better than anyone else in the room. He personified the future I was trying desperately to avoid. Aro studied my face again as he slowly shook his head. "This is unprecedented, Edward." He paused, and I heard something new in his mind. Envy. Aro wanted my gift. He again struggled to turn his thoughts elsewhere, when my expression reflected my understanding. He looked at Caius. "We need to discuss this." Caius frowned as Aro continued. "Dmitri, please escort Edward to the city gate and wait there with him. We'll send Felix to collect you when we've decided." Dmitri nodded slightly and held out his hand, directing me out. As we exited, I heard Aro explaining to Caius that the distance was necessary to negate my ability. Again, I could hear longing in his voice. I stayed focused on the Volturi's thoughts as we exited the building. "Why did he bother asking?" Caius inquired. "Edward is worried about the repercussions of taking matters into his own hands. His loyalty to Carlyle and his coven is as strong as most mating bonds. He has a deep connection to them," Aro explained, touching Marcus's hand as he spoke, ignoring the torrent of Marcus's past and reading his evaluation of me. Caius still couldn't understand Aro's hesitancy. "Are they encouraging him to do this?" "No, in fact they would stop him if they could. His coven is quite unique. Carlyle has created and attracted a diverse group of talented vampires." His thoughts drifted toward Alice, wondering about the extent of her gift. I sighed. This was not what I wanted. Their thoughts grew faint as we quickly crossed the city. "How many are in his coven?" Caius asked, with some alarm, but Aro held up his hand, refusing to answer. I could tell that Caius was willing to give me my peace. He saw me as a trivial being of no consequence. He didn't see any benefit in adding another mind reader to the guard, but my death would provide useful training practice. "Are you in favor of granting his request?" he asked. Their thoughts faded from my mind before I heard Aro's response. Damn it. The moon crept over the buildings, lighting the city with its glow as it rose. Dmitri led me to a small alcove near the entrance where we could stand and wait. No one human was awake in this part of the city, and only Dmitri's curiosity kept my mind from being completely blank. He had his own questions, but didn't voice them, so I didn't answer. The sound of the crickets was what I concentrated on, their rhythmic chirps counting down the end of my time. The sky had turned navy blue by the time Felix came into range of my ability. "They've decided," I warned Dmitri. He looked at me doubtfully, but then Felix rounded the corner closest to us. "It's time," he said. The assembly room had been cleared since I'd last been here. Only Aro, Caius, and their personal guard remained. Only the two ancients knew what my fate was to be. The other vampires in attendance were as curious as I was. Most wished for the same violent outcome as I did, seeing my demise as a spark of entertainment in a rather dull, sedentary life. "My dear Edward, welcome back," Aro said with enthusiasm. "Your wait wasn't too inconvenient, I hope." I snorted, noting Caius's sneer. Arrogant child, he thought. "I'm afraid you'll have to wait just a few moments longer," Aro continued, almost jovially. "There's another matter I'd like to discuss with you first." He let his offer to join the Volturi slide through his thoughts. I didn't hesitate in my response. "No, thank you." "You haven't even heard," Caius started, before Aro raised his hand. Before Caius could protest, his brother tapped his forehead. "Of course," he said, rolling his eyes. "You've read the question in my brother's uncontrolled thoughts." Unfortunately, Aro's thoughts were far from uncontrolled. I still couldn't sense if he'd grant my request. "You must understand what an honor it is to be extended this opportunity. The last to receive such quick acceptance were Jane and Alec," Aro said. Jane winced at Aro's comparison. "He's offering him a spot with the guard." Surely not. Master? Don't worry, dear one, your place is well secured, but talent such as Edward's doesn't cross our path often. Aro's gaze didn't waver. There's much here for you to learn. You'd be well compensated for your time. He pictured the archive he'd compiled in another part of the castle that included works of art, lost texts, and priceless artifacts. A short string of unfamiliar syllables ran through his head. An Etruscan, I decided. There's so much I could teach you, Edward. You would even be allowed to continue your alternative eating habits, should you desire. He envisioned me in a cape as dark as Jane's, standing in the place he saw as highest, at his right hand, feeding him the thoughts of everyone around him. He had no intention of giving me anything else. My temper took over. I have no desire to be anyone's personal listening device, though I could see why the idea is enticing. I smirked at Jane, implying her thoughts should be monitored. I got exactly the reaction I wanted. "Why, you insolent!" She took a step forward, prepared to give me the pain I so richly deserved. She glanced behind me at Felix, hoping he would finish the job once she'd had her fun. I braced myself for the end, but it too was denied me. "Stop!" Aro commanded, freezing everyone in the room. Cunning, he thought. "If that is your decision, then so be it." His friendly mood cooled. "We deny your request. To end your life would be wasteful," he concluded. "You are free to go, Edward." He waited for a response, but all he saw was my back as I stalked away. "I told you," Caius thought. Aro tried one last time. "Oh, and my dear Edward, I know what you are planning. Should you act against us, you will meet the fate you desire. But be so warned. You'll have to forego the unnatural philosophy of your family to do it. Should you find that unpalatable, I would be happy to extend my offer to you again." A whisper of a thought followed the statement, another alternative, it seemed, but he squelched it before I could derive its full meaning. "We'll see about that," I retorted, then slammed the door behind me. The Volturi's thoughts became a dull hum in the blackness of my mind as I left the castle. They'd send someone to follow me soon enough, I had no doubt. I stayed near the buildings as the sky lightened with the coming dawn. The city was awakening, and as I walked aimlessly, I watched the workers clean the streets and collect garbage in preparation for the day's festival. Soon, the streets would be filled with innocent humans, oblivious to the superior species all around them. They would be the witnesses who would guarantee my fate. I approached the main plaza with its enormous fountain and clock tower, and located a shaded corner. Instinctively, I curled my body into a ball at the foot of the stone wall. I tried to remember Bella's face again, but the image wouldn't come. After all I'd done, she'd finally left me completely, and I turned to more pressing needs. How would I end this meaningless existence? Any number of superhuman feats would draw enough attention that the Volturi would have to act quickly. But Aro was right. The most decisive action would be to hunt. Expose these ignorant humans to the monsters who lived side by side with them. The guard would have no choice then. It would be minutes before I became ash. I tried to steel myself against the terror I would inflict. Killing wasn't so hard. I'd done it countless times before, so long ago. My memory returned as hundreds of faces, those of my victims, appeared in my mind with perfect clarity as I remembered the monster I was 80 years ago. I'd cornered them, one by one, listening to their thoughts as their worries turned to fear. Fear turned to horror when I laid my hands on them, their final thoughts usually turning to repentance as I drained their life away. Some froze, some struggled, some begged for mercy, but it all made no difference. They'd all succumb to me, my teeth cutting through their warm flesh with ease. So many in those few years. I'd not thought of that period of my life in a long time. How hard would it be to resurrect that murderer? It wasn't the same, you know that. My inner voice, the conscience that had driven me back to Carlisle in the end, reminded me that I hadn't hunted just any humans. Innocents had been safe from me. Only criminals needed to fear. In order to guarantee my goals here, however, that distinction could not apply. I would have to kill publicly, violently, mercilessly, and indiscriminately, killing most especially the innocent. I cradled my face in my hands as Carlyle's voice came back to me. You are more than that monster, Edward. This is what gives you the ability to love. No, it has to be this way. There is no love in me any more, I told myself. The sun rose, casting bright streaks of light across the fountain before me. Shopkeepers arrived around the plaza, unfurling awnings and sweeping sidewalks. Some pushed carts of souvenirs into the plaza, preparing to ply the crowd with all types of edible rubbish and plastic baubles. Soon the area would be teeming with people, flooded with the rich scent of their blood. I could do this. How many would have to die? I tried to imagine stepping into the center of the crowd and beginning the carnage. The Volturi were expecting me to do something. Even now, I could hear the thoughts of several of the guard as they watched the plaza, waiting. Maybe only 1 or 2 humans would have to die. They couldn't die quickly, though. Just snapping their necks wouldn't be enough. I had to display what I was in all my deadly monstrosity, my teeth at their throat, allowing their arterial blood to spray on the crowd before taking that first swallow. The screams would follow when the crowd realized what I was doing, and I would have to chase my second victim. I would finish the first, though. His life was doomed once my lips reached his skin, so there was no point in prolonging his suffering. It would be even more effective to select a woman or a child to prey upon, but I couldn't bring myself to even consider that. Only grown men would die today.
I stood, watching a man push his broom past the entrance of the alley I'd been holed up in. He would be perfect, I mused, and I tried to imagine the pulse of his blood in my mouth, the cloying relief as I drank away his life. He looked at me, my would-be victim, and I heard fear race through his thoughts at the sight of me. I stared back, swallowing dryly, for once unable to muster the venom that came with the hunt. He strode away quickly, thinking of his family as he did, terrified but confused. You are not a monster, Edward. You have risen above that, Carlyle's voice chided. I sank back against the wall again, defeated. My father was right. I wasn't that monster anymore. Sadly, I discarded the idea of a killing spree. What else can I do? I could pull some Superman-type stunt, throw a car through a wall or jump off a building, but it wasn't vampire enough. On this day, the celebration of the elimination of the supernatural from Volterra, the display had to demonstrate that aspect. I had to show these people that I wasn't human, but how? As I struggled to find the best way to end my existence, my mind filled with new words. Be merciful to me, O Lord, for I am in distress. My eyes grow weak with sorrow, my soul and my body with grief. My life is consumed by anguish, and my years by groaning. My strength fails because of my affliction, and my bones grow weak. For I hear the slander of many, there is terror on every side. They conspire against me and plot to take my life. A verse from Psalms, the last thing I would expect to be in the center of my thoughts, and yet the words were completely appropriate. Carlyle would be proud. I repeated the words, wondering how God would respond to a prayer offered by a vampire. In answer to my question, Bella's image reappeared in my mind in a burst of bright light. I closed my eyes and clung to her. She was in our meadow, her face glowing, her hair flecked with red. "My kind of day," she said, smiling. "It's so light, so open." Of course, her heaven would be full of sunshine. She'd always been my light, my sun. Then the pain returned, searing my skin and scorching my lungs. The murmurs of thoughts around me faded away as I struggled for a breath through the agony. I deserved nothing less. "I miss you so much," I choked. "I'm so sorry. If I'd known—" "Edward." She traced my eye with one finger, slowly, carefully. "I didn't know where you were." Guilt consumed me, digesting my hardened bones in a pit of acid. "But you promised you'd stay safe for Charlie." She frowned. "I fell." Still altruistic,
Bella tried to deflect my unasked question. Why? You don't want to hear it. She brushed a renegade lock of hair back behind her ear. You're the only thing it would hurt me to lose. Did she die believing the lie? The hideous fabrication that I didn't love her? I never stopped loving you, Bella, I whispered. Well, that changes things, she said, reminding me that she had believed. All the what-ifs crashed down on me in a cold avalanche of regret. If I'd gone back, if I'd never left, if I hadn't been so selfish, she would be alive right now. I tried to take solace in the fact that she'd found her eternity, but I could have had her forever. Bella rebuked me with a shake of her head. It's too late. I'm sorry? How absurd could I be? I'd killed her. Despite everything I'd done, I'd killed her. A simple word couldn't capture the full scope of my sin or my remorse. My eyes stung as tearless needles pierced them. How could I even think that I deserved something as simple as death? For once, Bella didn't argue. It sounds reasonable. Surrounded by delicate wildflowers that paled in comparison to her radiance, she raised her perfect, angelic hand and invited me to join her, as if I could. Show me what you meant about the sun. My hand slipped from my face, and I inspected my arm, just as she had, that day in the meadow, that day she'd marveled at my skin's inhuman sparkle. In my mind, Bella nodded gently, as tiny reflected rainbows danced across her cheeks, telling me what I had to do. She was leading me to my final piece. The vision changed, and I remembered the last kiss, on her birthday. The softness of her lips, the feel of her hair on my fingers, her heavy breathing and racing pulse. It all came back. As the kiss ended, a new, childish question crept to my lips. Can you stay with me, Bella, until the end? I had no right to ask, after robbing her of her life, but no matter what I endured, I remained a selfish monster. Bella, ever selfless, just smiled. I'm not running anywhere.